alien slave was doomed to breeding experiments, and a human became her savior, the room was dark, filled with the smell of rust and damp stone. Chains hung from the walls, some broken, some still waiting for another victim. The only light came from a weak blue lamp above, flickering as if it too was afraid of this place. And in the middle of the room sat a young alien girl, her wrists bound with heavy iron cuffs. Her eyes were wide and glowing faintly in the dark, the mark of her species. She had once belonged to a proud and free people who lived among the stars, but now she was nothing more than a prisoner, trapped in a chamber of shadows. Her breathing was fast, her heart beating louder than the distant dripping water. Every sound outside the door made her flinch. The heavy boots of guards, the grinding of metal, the cruel laughter that echoed through the tunnels. She knew why they kept her. Here, she had overheard them many times. The words burned inside her mind, words about breeding, about experiments, about turning her body into something she did not choose. She was young, not yet ready for such horrors. Her people had fought to protect her, but they had failed. She had been taken when the warships fell, dragged into this prison while her home burned in the skies above. Now she was alone, her family gone, her planet silent, her future stolen. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, not to the gods of her kind, but to the stars themselves. Her people believed the stars could hear the voices of the desperate. She begged for freedom, or at least for an end that would come quickly. But the stars gave her no answer, only silence and the sound of her own trembling breath. The door creaked open, the sound like the cry of a dying animal. 2 guards entered, tall and cruel, their skin scaled and their eyes yellow. They carried strange weapons that hummed with a dangerous glow. They looked at her and smiled, not with kindness, but with hunger. "She is ready," one of them hissed in their broken tongue. The girl's stomach turned cold. She pressed her back against the wall, trying to melt into the stone. They spoke again, laughing, making cruel jokes that she did not fully understand. But she understood enough to know her time was running out. The guards left, but she knew they would return soon. She pulled against her chains, her wrists bleeding, but the metal did not break. She screamed, but her voice was weak, swallowed by the heavy walls. Her tears fell, hot and bitter, as she thought of her people's songs, the ones she would never hear again. Minutes passed like hours, each second a knife inside her chest. She could hear more voices outside now, a group preparing, footsteps moving closer. Her body shook, not from cold, but from the terror of what was coming. She tried to tell herself to stay strong, but her strength had long been broken. Then, for a moment, silence. No footsteps, no laughter, no sound at all. The girl's heart froze. Her eyes turned to the door. She knew silence was often worse than noise in this place. A low rumble shook the chamber. Dust falling from the ceiling, the chains rattled as the ground trembled beneath her. The lamp above flickered wildly, painting shadows that looked alive. She gasped, not knowing if this was another cruel game of her captors, or something new. Then came the sound, a loud crash that tore through the tunnels. The guards outside shouted, their voices sharp with fear, not laughter. The girl leaned forward, her chains biting into her skin. Something was happening, something different. The door slammed open, but not with the steady cruelty of her captors. It burst apart, pieces of metal flying across the room. A wave of dust and smoke rolled in, choking the air. The girl coughed, her eyes wide with shock. Through the smoke, she saw movement, a shadow taller than the guards, not scaled, not alien, not like them at all. The shape stepped forward, boots striking the ground with a heavy sound. The glow of firelight behind him outlined a human figure. The guards shouted, raising their weapons, but the figure did not stop. The girl could not believe what she was seeing. Humans were rare, almost mythical to her kind. They were said to be fragile, weak, not made for war, yet this one stood like a storm given flesh. His eyes burned with fire, his body moved with purpose. The chamber that once felt like her tomb was now filled with something new. Not hope, not yet, but a question. Who was this man, and why had he come here? The girl's chains rattled again. As she leaned forward, her voice too weak to call out, the human stepped deeper into the chamber, his face hidden by the smoke. But his presence alone broke the prison of shadows. The girl's fear remained, but it mixed now with something else. Curiosity, confusion, and the smallest spark of belief that maybe, just maybe, her prayer to the stars had been answered. The silence between them was heavy. The moment stretched, and the story of her survival had only just begun. The crash still echoed through the tunnels. But outside the chamber, the guards were already regrouping. They were not used to resistance, not used to intruders. This place was hidden for a reason. The alien girl could hear their shouts, their claws striking against the stone floors as they moved quickly. Her chains rattled again as she leaned forward, desperate to see what would happen next. The human stood tall in the smoke, silent, still. But the guards were not silent. One of them hissed orders, their voice sharp like broken glass. "Protect the chamber," it growled. "She must not be taken. She must not be lost." The words made the girl's blood run cold, because she realized then how important she was to them. They did not see her as a person, not as a child of her people. They saw her as a tool, a body for their plans, a vessel for their breeding program. She had overheard fragments before, whispers about creating a hybrid, a creature that would mix their cruel strength with her people's gifts. Something unnatural, something meant only for war. She had tried to ignore those whispers, hoping they were lies. But now, hearing the urgency in the guard's voice, she knew it was true. They had prepared her, kept her alive, not out of mercy, but for something far worse. Her heart pounded, and she wanted to scream, but her throat was too tight with fear. The guards rushed into the chamber, weapons raised, their scales reflecting the flickering blue light. The human still said nothing, his figure almost lost in the haze. The girl could not see his face, but she could feel his presence. It was like standing near a storm, silent for a moment, but ready to explode. One of the guards barked orders again. "Kill him, but do not harm the girl." Their voices were cruel, but also nervous. They had never fought a human like this before, perhaps never fought one at all. The girl pressed her back against the wall, her eyes moving between her captors and her would-be savior. Every breath felt heavy, every second stretched. She remembered the times the guards would talk to each other outside her cell, boasting of their future empire, of the armies they would raise with their kind's stolen blood. It was their plan to create children of war, children that would never know freedom, children that would never know peace. The thought burned inside her. If she stayed here, she would be nothing more than the start of that nightmare. Her hands pulled against the chains again. Though she knew they would not break, still she pulled, as if some hidden strength might come to her in this desperate moment. The guards moved closer, circling the human. They expected him to retreat, to fear their weapons, but he did not move. He stood like a statue, his eyes glowing faintly now through the smoke. And the girl realized with shock that his weapon was already in his hand. It was not like theirs, not humming with strange alien power. It looked simple, clean, and deadly. The guards laughed when they saw it, mocking his primitive tool. But their laughter shook like it was forced, like they were hiding their unease. The leader of the guards snarled and turned to the girl. "You see this?" It hissed, pointing at the human. "This is the end of your hope, little one. Your protector will die as your people died." The words cut deep, and for a moment she believed him. But then the human moved, faster than her eyes could follow. The sound of metal against flesh filled the chamber. One guard cried out. falling before his weapon even fired. The others stepped back, hissing, realizing too late that this was no ordinary fight. The girl's chest rose and fell as she tried to breathe. The chamber that had always been filled with despair now trembled with chaos. The guards were shouting orders, but their voices no longer carried confidence. Fear had begun to slip into their tones, fear of a man they had mocked only seconds ago. And beneath the clash of metal and the echoes of war cries, the girl remembered the darkest words she had overheard. The plan of her captors was not just to use her, not just to create one abomination. They wanted many, a generation of hybrid soldiers to conquer the stars. She was only the first piece, the first experiment, the first seed of their empire. Her eyes watered as she stared at the human, her voice finally breaking free. "Don't let them take me back," she whispered, almost too soft to hear. The chains rattled as she struggled again, her wrists burning, her body shaking. For the first time since her capture, her will to survive rose above her despair. The guards struck again, but the chamber itself seemed to shudder with the violence of the fight. The lamp above flickered and cracked, sparks falling like dying stars, the girl's tears mixed with sweat as she pressed harder against the wall. She had never seen anything like this. A human standing against monsters, and in the middle of all that chaos, one thought grew stronger in her heart. Maybe the stars had answered her prayer after all. Maybe this man was not just a stranger, but the weapon fate had sent against the captor's plan. The question was not if he could fight, because he already had. The question was, could he win before their nightmare came true? The chamber burned with smoke and dust, the broken door still groaning on its hinges. The alien girl's heart beat so fast it hurt, her eyes locked on the lone human who stood between her and her captors. The guards hissed in fury, their scaled bodies moving like predators, weapons raised with cruel precision. The air felt heavy, as if the room itself knew a storm was about to break. The human did not speak. He did not shout. He simply moved. His boots struck the stone with calm weight, each step echoing louder than the guards' roars. In his hand, the weapon gleamed faintly. Small compared to the alien blades, it carried like it was enough to kill worlds. The girl felt a strange energy in his silence, like the stillness before lightning tears the sky apart. One guard lunged first, faster than the others, its weapon humming as it aimed for his throat. But the human twisted, almost too fast to see, the strike missing by inches. In the same breath, his blade cut across the creature's scaled neck. Clean and sharp, the guard dropped without a sound, its blood staining the stones dark. The other guards shouted, their voices filled with panic, not rage. They had expected a weak intruder, easy prey, but this was something else. The girl's chains rattled as she leaned forward, her glowing eyes wide. She had never seen anyone fight like this, not even the warriors of her people. Another guard swung its heavy axe, sparks flying as it hit the wall. The human ducked, rolled, and struck upward, piercing straight into its chest. The creature screamed, claws thrashing wildly. Before collapsing in a pool of smoke and blood, the girl gasped, covering her mouth, her breath shaking, unable to look away. But the guards were many, and the human was only one. They circled him, their weapons flashing, their scales glowing faintly in the dying blue light. The leader hissed an order. Do not stop. Crush him. But leave the girl. Their boots struck the floor together, a circle of death closing in. The human raised his head, his eyes cold, his blade steady. For a moment, silence fell again. The only sound was the crack of the lamp above and the girl's shallow breathing. Then the chamber exploded in chaos, weapons clashing, sparks flying, growls and roars filling the air like thunder. The girl pressed against the wall, every strike shaking her to the bone. One guard tried to grab the human from behind, but he spun and cut its arm clean off. Another leapt from the side, but was met with a kick so strong it cracked bone. The girl's chains rattled violently as she trembled, each moment a blur of violence and speed. The human fought not like prey, not like prey at all, but like a storm unleashed. Still, the battle was not easy. The guards were stronger, heavier, their weapons humming with deadly alien power. The human's face twisted with effort, his movements precise but strained. Blood marked his arm where one blade had grazed him, a reminder that he was not invincible. The girl gasped when she saw the wound, fear clawing at her chest. If he fell, there would be no one left to stop them, no one left to save her. The guards seemed to sense it too, pressing harder, their hisses sharper, their strikes faster. The chamber rang with the sound of metal on metal, steel on bone, and screams that cut through the dark. But the human did not falter. Every strike of his blade was filled with purpose. Every move meant to kill. He fought as if he had been waiting for this moment his entire life. Not only to fight, but to end something terrible, something cruel. The girl's eyes filled with tears, not of sorrow, no, but of something new. Hope, small and fragile, but alive. For the first time since her capture, she saw the possibility of freedom. It was not promised, not yet, but it was there, flickering. Like the broken lamp above them, the leader of the guards roared, stepping forward with its massive weapon. It was larger than the rest, its armor thicker, its eyes burning with rage. The human turned to face it, their gazes locking. The room silent once more. The girl held her breath, because she knew this was not just another fight. This was the true test. If the human fell here, her story would end in darkness. But if he won, if he could strike down the leader, the others might break. Her wrists bled as she pulled against the chains, whispering words only the stars could. "Here, please," she begged, her voice shaking. "Don't let him fall." The leader charged, the ground trembling under its weight. The human did not move until the last possible moment. Then he stepped aside, his blade cutting across the monster's leg. The creature roared, swinging wildly, nearly splitting the chamber wall. The human ducked again, the blade flashing, striking. Once, twice, blood spraying across the stone. The girl screamed as the fight grew closer, sparks flying as the two clashed in the middle of the room. Every strike shook the chamber. Every breath seemed to decide life or death. The other guards shouted, but none dared to interfere. They watched their leader fight, their confidence hanging on its survival. The girl's tears burned her cheeks as she prayed harder. If the human could win this, maybe, just maybe, she would live. The clash grew louder, faster, the sound of steel against alien bone filling the dark. The lamp above shattered, plunging the room into near darkness. Only the glow of weapons and the fire in their eyes lit the battlefield. The girl's heart felt like it would burst, and in that chaos, in that storm of blood and fire, one truth became clear. This was no ordinary man. This was no accident. This human had come here for a reason, and the captor's nightmare was only beginning. The chamber was shaking with every strike, every roar, every clash of steel and claw. The leader of the guards towered over the human, its eyes glowing with savage fury. It swung its massive weapon with the force of a storm, every strike strong, enough to shatter stone. The girl watched, her chains biting into her skin, her breath sharp and quick, her heart trapped in terror. The human moved with speed that seemed impossible. Each swing that should have broken him instead hit the walls, breaking stone and sending shards flying. His blade cut again and again. Each strike aimed to weaken the monster, not to waste energy. But the leader was tough, its scales like iron, its body built for war. The smaller guards circled the fight, their yellow eyes glowing in the dark. They did not dare join in yet, but they were ready, waiting for the moment the human slipped. One mistake, one slow breath, and they would strike. Together, the girl could see it in their movements, the tension of predators watching a cornered prey. The human gritted his teeth, his arm bleeding from another close strike. The monster laughed, a low guttural sound, believing his strength was failing. "You are nothing," it hissed, its words thick with hate. "You bleed, you break, and you will fall, like her people before you." The girl shook her head, tears burning her eyes. She wanted to scream at the monster, to tell it the human was not like them, but her voice was weak, her throat tight. The words stuck like stones in her chest. All she could do was watch as the human faced the fury of a beast 10 times his size. The clash continued, faster now, the sound of blades like thunder in the chamber. The human's body twisted and turned, his strikes fast and precise. Every cut he made was meant to weaken, to bleed the leader slowly. He was not fighting with rage. He was fighting with control, but the monster was not without cunning. It pretended to stumble, then swung suddenly, its massive claw cutting across the human's shoulder. Blood sprayed. The girl screamed, her chains rattling violently as she pulled against them. The human staggered, his weapon shaking, but his eyes still locked on his enemy. The smaller guards hissed and moved closer, sensing weakness. Their claws scraped against the stone, their weapons raised, ready to finish the fight. The girl's heart dropped, her body trembling as she whispered, "No, no, no." It felt like hope itself was being torn from her chest. But then the human stood taller, his blood dripping, his blade steady once more. His breathing was heavy, but his eyes burned like fire. The monster stepped forward, certain of its victory. And that was when the human struck. He moved faster than before, his blade slicing across the leader's arm. The monster roared in shock. Stumbling backward, the human pressed forward, striking again, his movements sharp and brutal. Every strike now was filled with fury. Not only survival, but vengeance. The smaller guards froze, unsure, their confidence cracking. They had never seen their leader wounded, never seen their leader bleed. The girl's eyes widened, her tears falling faster. For the first time she saw the monster step back, its rage turning to fear. The chamber filled with the sound of their battle, stone breaking, chains rattling, blood spraying. The human pressed harder, his blade glowing faintly in the dying light. He ducked another massive swing, then stabbed forward, piercing through thick scales. The leader screamed, its voice shaking the walls, its claws thrashing wildly. The girl covered her ears, the sound cutting like knives. Her chest rose and fell with wild breaths, her body trembling from the chaos. She whispered again to the stars, her voice shaking, "Please, let him win, please." The human roared, his voice echoing like thunder. With one final strike, he drove his blade deep into the leader's chest. The monster staggered, its eyes wide with disbelief. Then, with a last guttural cry, it fell, crashing to the ground like a mountain collapsing. The chamber went silent. Except for the human's heavy breathing, the smaller guards hissed, their confidence shattered. They looked at their fallen leader, then at the human, and for the first time, fear filled their eyes. But fear is a dangerous thing. It can make creatures run, or it can make them desperate. The girl saw the decision in their faces before they moved. They were not running, they were attacking. Together they lunged, all at once, a storm of claws and steel. The human turned, his blade rising again, his body ready despite his wounds. The chamber became a blur of violence once more. The girl screamed as the battle consumed everything around her. Blood, steel, fire, and shadows danced in the chamber of despair, and the clash of wills raged on, more brutal, more desperate, more deadly than before. The chamber was thick with smoke and the stench of blood. The leader's body lay broken on the ground, its scaled chest torn open by the human's blade. But there was no time to breathe, no time to rest. The smaller guards had thrown themselves forward, their fear turning into madness. They came all at once, claws raised, weapons flashing, their roars shaking the stone walls. The human tightened his grip, his knuckles pale, his blade still dripping. He was hurt, his body bruised and bleeding, but his spirit had not broken. The girl's eyes followed him, her own breath stuck in her throat. The clash began again, faster, sharper, more violent than before. The human moved like lightning, dodging and striking, his blade cutting through scaled flesh. One guard screamed as steel split its chest. Another fell as his weapon pierced its skull, but more pressed in, their claws tearing the air, their teeth snapping like wolves. The girl pulled hard against her chains, her wrists raw and bloody. She cried out, her voice desperate, "Please, don't stop, don't fall." But the human could not hear her over the storm of battle. Every second he fought was a step closer to death. One guard's weapon slashed across his arm, blood spraying against the wall. He grunted but did not falter, his blade twisting upward, taking the guard's head clean off. Another guard leapt from behind, but he turned just in time. His boot slammed into its chest, sending it crashing into the wall. The girl's heart pounded with every strike, her tears mixing with the dust on her face. She had never seen such strength, never seen such fury. It was like watching the storm itself fight against the darkness. But storms can fade, and her fear grew that he would too. The guards slowed, their bodies falling one after another. Soon the chamber floor was slick with blood, broken weapons scattered like bones. The last of them hissed and lunged, desperation in its yellow eyes. The human caught it mid-strike, twisting its arm until bone cracked. The guard screamed, but the human showed no mercy. With one final thrust, he ended it. His blade sinking deep, the chamber went quiet again, filled only with the sound of his heavy breathing. The girl's chains rattled softly as she stared at him, her body frozen between fear and awe. He staggered for a moment, his hand pressing against his bleeding shoulder, yet his eyes remained sharp, his body still filled with unbroken will. Slowly, he turned toward her, his boots heavy against the stone. Each step closer sent her heart racing faster. The girl pressed her back against the wall, her glowing eyes wide. For a moment, she feared he was another captor, another monster in human skin. But then she saw his face, tired, scarred, but not cruel. His eyes met hers, not with hunger, not with hate, but with something she had not seen in years' compassion. He knelt before her, his blade still in hand. The girl flinched, but he did not raise it against her. Instead, he studied the chains that bound her, his jaw tight, his breath heavy. "Hold still," he muttered, his voice low and steady. With one strike, his blade shattered the cuff around her wrist. The sound rang louder than thunder in her ears. Her arm fell free, trembling, blood rushing back into her numb hand. She gasped, her tears falling harder, not from pain, but from the shock of freedom. He struck again, the second cuff breaking. The girl's chains dropped to the floor, their sound like the ending of a nightmare. Her body shook as she pulled her, hands to her chest. For the first time since her capture, she felt the weight of hope. The human leaned back, his blade lowering, his body swaying slightly from exhaustion. But his eyes never left hers. "You're safe now," he said simply. His words were rough, but in them she heard something powerful. The girl wanted to believe him. She wanted to trust him. But her fear was still there. The fear of betrayal, the fear that this was only another trick. Her lips trembled as she whispered, Why save me?" Her voice cracked. Barely more than a breath. The human stood, his shadow tall in the broken light. He glanced at the bodies of the guards and back at her. "Because no one deserves this," he said, his voice heavy but certain. The girl's heart twisted her. Tears burning, she lowered her head, unable to stop the sob that escaped her. It was not weakness, it was release, the pain of chains finally breaking. The human reached out a hand, his palm open, waiting. For a moment she hesitated, her fear still strong, but then slowly she placed her trembling hand into his. His grip was steady, strong, not like the cold claws of her captors. For the first time, warmth spread through her skin, and with it, the fragile spark of trust. The chamber around them was silent, but the silence no longer felt like a tomb. It felt like the breath before a new beginning. The girl wiped her tears, her voice trembling but stronger now. "Will they come back?" she asked, her fear still heavy. The human's eyes darkened, his blade rising again. "Yes," he answered, his voice like stone, "but we'll be ready." The girl nodded slowly, her body still weak, but her spirit no longer broken. And as he led her out of the prison of shadows, her story of survival truly began. The tunnels stretched endlessly, their walls cracked and wet with old moisture. The human walked ahead, his weapon still drawn, his body tense despite his wounds. The alien girl followed close, her bare feet soft against the stone, her chains finally gone, but their weight still. Heavy in her mind, every sound echoed too loudly, every shadow felt alive, every breath carried the memory of what she had just escaped. She kept looking at him, this strange warrior of flesh and blood. His back was straight, though he bled from more than one wound. His steps were steady, each one carrying the weight of purpose. And yet there was no pride in his movements, only quiet determination. She wanted to ask him questions, but fear tightened her throat. What if he was not her savior, but another captor in disguise? What if his kindness was only temporary, and his plan was different from hers? The thoughts made her tremble, but she had no choice but to follow. At last he slowed, stopping in a broken chamber where the ceiling had collapsed long ago. Faint light from the surface spilled through cracks. Above, painting the walls with thin silver lines, he leaned against a stone column, breathing heavily, his face pale with blood loss. For the first time since the battle, he looked less like a storm and more like a man. The girl hesitated, then whispered, "Why save me?" Her voice echoed softly in the chamber, fragile, almost broken. The human did not look at her right away. He stared at the floor, silent, as if searching for the right words. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Because they were going to break you, turn you into something you were not." His eyes lifted, sharp and heavy, locking with hers. "And I don't let monsters decide who lives and who suffers." The girl's lips parted, her breath caught in her throat. There was no hesitation in his tone, no lie, but still, the question burned inside her. "You don't even know me," she said, her voice trembling. The human wiped the blood from his blade, his expression unreadable. "I don't need to know you," he answered. "I saw what they were doing. That was enough." His words struck her harder than any chain ever had. Her people had fought, they had died, they had prayed to the stars for help, but it was not her own kind who saved her, not her warriors, not her gods. It was this stranger, this human, whose world was not hers. And yet, in his eyes, she saw more protection than she had ever seen in her captor's chains. But another thought stirred in her heart, darker, sharper. "Why are you here at all?" she asked, her glowing eyes narrowing. "These tunnels are hidden. My captors made sure no one could find them." Her voice trembled with suspicion, with fear that she was part of a bigger plan. The human was quiet again, his jaw tight, his gaze drifting to the cracks of light above. Finally, he spoke, his tone carrying weight she could not fully understand. "I wasn't looking for them," he said slowly. "I was hunting something else, something worse. And I found this place instead." The girl's chest tightened, her fear mixing with curiosity. "Something worse," she whispered, her voice soft. The human nodded once, his eyes cold as stone. "They weren't the only ones doing this. There are others, spread across the stars." Her stomach turned, The ground beneath her seemed to tilt. If what he said was true, then she was not the only one. Her people were not the only victims. There were others, countless others, chained in dark rooms, waiting to be broken. She shook her head, tears spilling from her eyes again. No, it can't be, it can't. Her voice cracked, her body trembling as she wrapped her arms around herself. But the human's silence was its own confirmation. He finally pushed himself from the column, his body swaying with fatigue but his stance still strong. He walked closer to her, kneeling so his eyes met hers directly. "I can't change what happened to your people," he said softly, "but I can make sure it doesn't happen again." Her breath hitched, her glowing eyes searching his face for deception, but she found none, only exhaustion and a fire that would not go out. He was not lying. She realized this man carried a burden, one bigger than her, bigger than this chamber, bigger than even her captor's twisted plans. Still, her fear did not leave her fully. Her voice shook as she asked, "What do you want from me?" The human blinked, surprised by the question. "Nothing," he said after a long pause. "Only that you live free." The word struck her, heart like lightning. For years she had been treated as property, as a vessel, as a tool. And here, in the darkness, a stranger spoke of her life as if it mattered. Her tears fell again, but this time they were not only from fear. Silence stretched between them, heavy, filled with unspoken things. Finally, the human rose again, his weapon hanging at his side. "They'll send more," he said, his voice hard once more. This was only the beginning. The girl's body shook as she realized the truth. Her rescue was not the end of her nightmare. It was the start of another war. The tunnels around them seemed to breathe with danger, every shadow a threat. Her freedom was fragile, and the monsters who had stolen it were not finished yet. She took a step closer to him, her voice small but steady. "Then I'll follow you, wherever you go." The human's eyes flicked to hers. Unreadable, he did not speak right away, but he did not refuse her either. And in that silence, in that fragile bond, a new story began. A girl once chained and a human burdened with vengeance. Two lives that were never meant to meet, now tied together by blood, war, and fate. And above them, the stars burned, silent witnesses to the truth just revealed. The tunnels stretched into endless blackness, every step echoing through stone that had witnessed centuries of cruelty. The human led the way, his blade still in hand, his body swaying with pain but refusing to fall. The alien girl followed, her legs weak, her wrists still raw from the chains. And yet, every step she took felt lighter than the one before. She was free, but freedom in these tunnels did not feel safe. It felt like walking through the mouth of a beast that still breathed. Every shadow whispered of enemies. Every gust of cold air smelled of blood. The human paused often, his head tilting. To the silence around them, his eyes scanned every corner, his grip never loosening from his weapon. He did not trust the quiet, and neither did she. The monsters were dead, but the prison itself still felt alive. Finally, they reached a chamber that opened into the surface. Cracks in the ceiling let pale light spill through, silver against the dust and smoke. The girl lifted her head, her glowing eyes widening at the sight of the stars above. For the first time in so long she saw them without bars, without walls, without chains. Her knees gave way, and she collapsed to the floor. Tears ran down her cheeks as she whispered, "The stars, I can see them again." Her voice cracked, her body trembling. The human looked at her for a long moment, his face unreadable, but he did not speak. He only turned his eyes to the stars as well, his jaw tightening, as if they reminded him of something he had lost. The silence between them was heavy, but it was not empty. It was filled with something new, something fragile, something alive. The girl wiped her tears, her voice trembling but steady. "You saved me, but you are broken too," she said. The human gave no answer, but his silence was enough. He carried. wounds deeper than the blood on his skin, wounds carved by war. Before she could say more, the ground shook beneath them. Dust fell from the ceiling, cracks spreading wider, the stars above trembling in her sight. The girl gasped, clutching the stone floor. The human's eyes narrowed, his blade rising once more. From the tunnels behind them came the sound of drums, heavy and slow. Then came the roars, not of fear, but of anger. The girl's chest tightened, her stomach twisting with dread. Her captors had not given up. More were coming, stronger than before. The human turned, his body tense, his stance sharp despite his wounds. The girl crawled closer, her voice breaking. We cannot fight them, not all of them. But his eyes remained locked on the shadows. Below, his blade gleaming faintly in the starlight. We don't run, he said simply, his voice cold as iron. The girl's breath caught, her fear mixing with something else. Faith. She did not understand this man, this human who bled but did not bend. But she felt it, deep in her heart. The truth of his words. He was not only her rescuer, he was something greater. The roars grew louder, a sound of boots striking stone like thunder. The tunnels were alive again, filled with enemies who would not stop. The girl grabbed the human's arm, her voice trembling. If we fight, we die. The human turned his head slightly, his eyes sharp. If we run, the others die, he said. The girl froze, her tears fresh on her cheeks. The others, she whispered, her voice shaking. He nodded once, his face grim. They have more prisons, more chambers, more like you. The girl's heart shattered. At the words, her body trembling. She had thought her nightmare was hers alone. But it was not. She felt sick, she felt broken, but also something else. She felt her blood burn, her spirit rise, her fear turn into fire. If there were others, if there were more children like her, then she could not be silent. She could not be weak. She stood, her legs trembling but her eyes burning. Then we fight, she said, her voice small but sharp. The human looked at her, a faint shadow of approval flickering across his face. He turned back to the tunnels. The roar of enemies now closer, louder, endless. Together they stood, broken but unyielding, the chamber. Around them shook with the weight of the army below. The girl's tears fell one last time, but her voice was steady. If the stars hear us, let them hear this. We will not be slaves again. The human raised his blade, the fire in his eyes brighter than the stars above. The girl clenched her fists, her fear replaced with a fragile courage. And as the first shadow of their enemy appeared in the tunnel mouth, the story of chains ended and the story of war began.